Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Community Safety Policy and Scrutiny meeting. This meeting is being webcast, so welcome to everybody who's joining us at home. As you'll be aware, we are not meeting in person this evening. This is in light of the decision taken by the Council that until the end of this month, the Council's reverting to holding its scrutiny meetings remotely in the interest of minimising any risk to the public, elected members and staff. So while this meeting is being held in accordance with statutory requirements, this will not be regarded as a formal meeting of the committee, but the papers have been published in advance in the normal way as if it were a formal meeting of this committee. So that's where we are this evening. So welcome members and welcome officers and guests to the meeting this evening. Apologies I've received. Apologies from Councillor Rosie Baker. And I think everyone else is present. Councillor Vassy is just joining us now. Declaration of interests. Do any members have any interest to declare on the matters that we'll be discussing this evening? Nope. Thank you for that. Agenda item 2, minutes of the committee meeting held on the 19th of October 2021. Can I ask members if they have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Not seeing anything. There was just one minor typo really on page 3, third paragraph down on page 3, third line up. Members inquired about rent arrays. I think that should be rent arrears. I think that was the only item that I picked up. So are members happy on that basis for the minutes to be approved as an accurate record? Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, public participation. We have no members of the public registered to speak at this evening's meeting. So we may move on to the 2 substantive items, which I propose to switch. Agenda item 4, finance and performance Q2 monitor. I propose to take after item 5, Safe York Partnership report. That's just so that the guests that we have for agenda item 5, I know Sarah has to be away by 6:30, so I wanted to make sure we make best use of our guest time. So I'm moving that agenda item up. So we'll move to agenda item 5, Safe York Partnership, tackling high-risk antisocial behaviour. So I'd like to thank Jane Mowat for producing the report. I would like to welcome Sarah Orton from the Youth Justice team and Superintendent Mark Khan from North Yorkshire Police to join us for this item. So I'll ask Jane to introduce the report, but it provides an overview of how antisocial behaviour is tackled in the city, focusing on the work of the joint North Yorkshire Police City of York Council Community Safety Hub and the plans to develop that approach based on learning from delivery during the challenges of COVID. What I'd like to do is sort of chunk the discussion up into discrete sections to give sort of members the opportunity to come in with comments and questions as we go along, and also for Mark and Sarah to add anything they want to add or to respond to any questions that members might have. So what I'd like to do is ask Jane to introduce the report and initially focus on paragraphs 4 and 5 of the report. So that's saying a bit about the current structure of the Community Safety Hub and the current approach to tackling ASB and how we work with Mark and his colleagues in the police and with Sarah and her colleagues in the Youth Justice team. So if I can hand over to you, Jane.
Okay. So the the initial part of the report obviously sets the context with the legislation and talks a little bit about the figures that we've seen. So you've got some idea of what things have looked like over the past 12 months. So since 2014, we've had a joint North Yorkshire Police, City of York Council Community Safety Hub co-located in West offices, but obviously COVID came along and so we've been pretty remote based working since that time, unfortunately. The concept behind the hub was to bring together both a team of police officers dedicated to tackling antisocial behaviour with council officers who are specialists in antisocial behaviour. So the idea behind that was very much driven by trying to develop a much more effective and efficient way of tackling antisocial behaviour. So prior to the hub being established, it wouldn't be uncommon for somebody to report an incident of ASB to North Yorkshire Police using the 101 service, for perhaps a PCSO to be dispatched, but by that time that same individual has reported it into their housing management officer, and a housing management officer has also been, they may have had a conversation with somebody in community safety. So there was potential for duplication and delay in dealing with things. So the idea was to try and deal with things in a much more timely fashion, and also to facilitate and coordinate a much better means of sharing information and intelligence. So the whole hub concept is underpinned by a shared case management system called a Kerma First, which enables us to share information readily between my staff in the council and the police officers in the team. So the team is basically consists of 5 police officers, so we've got a sergeant and 4 PCs, and then we have 4 antisocial behaviour officers who deal largely with tenancy related antisocial behaviour, and then a team of 9 neighbourhood enforcement officers dealing with environmental crime. So there are obviously links between the 3 elements of the team. So the police would be picking up issues reported through the police system at the same time as my tenancy based antisocial behaviour officers will be looking at issues on behalf of housing, and also there may be environmental crime issues as well. So it's creating that fully joined up approach. So our approach is very much that the hub deals with the most serious cases. So generally speaking, much of the antisocial behaviour that occurs in the city is fairly low level, and we would expect that to be picked up by an individual organisation or service. So it may be picked up just generally by the police and dealt with, never to be rearing its head again, or it could be picked up through housing management officers engaging with residents and just dealing with the issue themselves. Sometimes things are a little bit more tricky, and at that point other partners may be engaged, but it would still be managed very much by that service or by the police at that stage in the process. Once things reach a level where everything has been tried in terms of localised working by those individuals or services, then the case would be referred across to the hub to look at. Now, antisocial behaviour can obviously be identified in many ways. So it may be that it comes through to us from housing, or it may be from a build-up of cases that we've seen building up through the police. Obviously, not all antisocial behaviour relates to a single property, so sometimes it can be a case of a hotspot emerging. So we might see levels of antisocial behaviour increasing in one part of the city, in one ward, or even more localised than that into a street or a specific open space, in which case, again, the hub would get involved at that stage and start to drive the activity through a multi-agency approach. And then overlaid into that, since 2019, we've significantly increased our concerns around things like county lines. So working very closely with the police intelligence unit there on a weekly basis to discuss those individuals or properties where we have concerns around county lines. I think certainly COVID came at a time when I was probably looking anyway at reviewing the way that we approach the hub. We'd had the hub approach going for 5 years, so it was very much timely for a review. And then when COVID came along, it very much changed the way that we work. So things that sort of hadn't really hit our radar previously, obviously we had to move to virtual meetings. And much of the work that's done by the hub is underpinned by very strong multi-agency working. So having those meetings over virtual platforms was initially a bit of a learning curve, but then has actually identified that it can make meetings happen in a much more timely fashion, because we're not waiting to book rooms to hold meetings. We're not waiting for partners to fit meetings around other commitments. And certainly where we've got partners who cover a wider area than just the city of York, we're not spending lots of time with people travelling to and from meetings. And then in the mix of that, COVID also brought about a closure of the courts. So enforcement would always be our last course of action. So we would look at everything we can possibly do to address the problem before we look to be taking a case through to prosecution. The courts closing meant that that option was completely closed to us. And also in the mix of that, the government decided that we were unable to look at eviction of people during the pandemic. So again, some of the things that we would be looking at where cases have got to a very severe level and we're looking at prosecution action, we couldn't take that action. So we had to look at a much more holistic approach and creative working between partners to address some of the problems that were ongoing at the time. From doing that, I think it's highlighted to us that an early intervention and prevention approach is obviously the way to go, and that we would want to be looking at cases earlier in the process than they were originally coming through to the hub. So where we start to see that build up, that picture of antisocial behaviour emerging, instead of waiting until it's reached such a high level that it then becomes difficult to tackle, to be bringing those cases into the hub and building that evidence at that earlier stage. And then I've put better communication between the neighbourhood policing teams and community safety. So one of the things that we introduced during the pandemic was a daily phone call. So on a daily basis at 8:30 in the morning, I speak to the sergeant who works within my team and the 2 inspectors from the neighbourhood policing teams and their sergeants too. And we have a look at the previous 24 hours antisocial behaviour incidents. And from that enables us to identify where issues are beginning to emerge that we might need to put in place a multi-agency or a wider agency approach. But it also enables us to keep a much closer handle on what's going on across the city. That's sort of facilitated a review from me, really, in relation to our delivery model. I know that Mark will talk about some of the work that they're doing within North Yorkshire Police that will support this, but looking much more closely from the early intervention and prevention perspective, but really focusing in on multi-agency problem solving and articulating those problems into proper multi-agency problem-solving plans. I've given you a couple of case studies at paragraph 7 where we have used this approach. So one was based in a residential street that I know members who are on this meeting will be well aware of, where we worked together within the parameters that we were constrained through COVID to pull together virtual meetings, to involve the community in what we were doing, providing feedback to that community in the form of letters, working together with a range of providers from local area coordinators, social care teams, to resolve those issues in a holistic way, and achieving some great success in doing so. And then the other case study I've given you relates to an outdoor space. And outdoor spaces are very tricky in terms of dealing with antisocial behaviour, because much of the legislation is very centred on premises. So, for example, where there is a significant amount of noise related to behaviour that's going on in an open space, the legislation that my team in the neighbourhood enforcement officers would use to address that is not available to them. We can only deal with noise whether it's coming from a premises. So again, working very closely with the ward councillors in that area, working very closely with the police, with Sarah Orton's team. Sarah's on today from the youth offending team, to look at all aspects of the issues that were occurring and working together to address through them. So the plan very much is to develop that approach. Certainly there is no intention to drop the daily meetings with the police. That's working very, very well. Building on the lessons that we've learnt during the pandemic to improve the way that we're sharing intelligence, and we're building that intelligence picture. And again, you know, this is an area where many times over, as we've been addressing problems, particularly throughout the summer, it's become abundantly clear the importance of encouraging residents to ring in cases and reporting through 101. It's that build-up of reporting things to the police that enables us to identify that an issue is emerging. And at that point, we then place that as a master case onto our case management system to then manage the problem through working with partners. So I'm going to leave it there, because I want to give you the biggest opportunity to ask questions, and also for Sarah and Mark to come in as well.
Yeah, no, that's super. Thanks for setting the scene, Jane. Mark, if I can ask you to sort of share your thoughts on sort of some of the challenges you have and you are encountering, and from your perspective, how the hub is working. And I suppose one sort of thought for you to, I suppose, to reflect on is if we have a system that's reliant on reporting and information being provided by residents and others to the police, what's the potential impact of difficulties that residents have in actually reporting issues, and to what extent the issues are out there that are unknown because of factors which I appreciate are beyond your control, in terms of difficulties that residents have in communicating through to the police. So that's just something to throw into the mix for it'd be good to get your views on, but I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Okay, I suppose I'll start off with, Jane did mention what we're trying to do in North Yorkshire Police in terms of our place-based working project. So I don't want to get too technical, but it sort of helps. We're trying to, policing UK and us in North Yorkshire as well, we're trying to move more towards a public health approach to policing. So traditionally, if for those of, forgive me if you know about public health approaches, but for those that haven't heard of it before, basically the public health approach is that there are 3 levels of prevention. There's primary prevention, which is at that community level. So this is taken from health. So for example, the COVID jab, giving everyone the booster jab to prevent people getting it. Then there's a secondary, which is around when crisis is beginning to happen and we're getting some issues emerging that we deal with. And then tertiary is where we get called and we respond. Now, traditionally, I would suggest that in terms of tertiary, that crisis management, that responding to calls for service, that investigation, that's where the police traditionally sit. Our preventative work sometimes goes into the secondary. So this is a whole new concept for us to get to that sort of community level prevention. The purpose of that is, as Jane has mentioned, is early intervention and prevention. So although we are asking residents, and traditionally, again, we ask members of the public to share information with us, what we're wanting to do is to find out those pieces of information, where something is germinating, where a problem, an issue, a vulnerability is germinating, and we can identify it at that stage so that we can take preventative action. I've got to say that it's possible for us to do it because there's examples of this happening in policing across the world, but it's going to take a big cultural change for us to get to that point. But that's the process that we're going through with our partners. So when we get to place-based working will begin to start getting embedded into North Yorkshire Police over the next 1, 2, 3 years. So it's a long-term ambition. But practically what we're going to do is we're going to provide problem-solving training to all our staff. Problem-solving training, which is based on evidence. It's an evidence base. It's academically sound, using the SARA model, and Jane will know all about that. And what we want to do is create a common language around problem-solving with partners. So the 4 elements of SARA, S-A-R-A, scanning, analysis, responding, and then the A is assessment. So it's just using that simple language, writing plans together to move forward, and more importantly, getting our own colleagues internally to begin to think about how we're going to solve problems. And I'll come to an example to sort of clarify that at the end. We also need to identify place. Now, place-based working is not unique to North Yorkshire Police. I'm sure everyone knows that. York City Council, North Yorkshire County Council, the Tube, lots of agencies are talking about place-based working. And we want to be part of that approach. So when we're approaching place-based working in York, what I want to do is link in with partners and say, right, where are the places in York that we need to identify in terms of community safety and antisocial behaviour? Because once we identify the places, then it's within my gift then to talk about how I allocate my resource. I don't have loads of resource, but I have a significant amount of resource, and it's understanding how best to allocate that resource to work with partners to deal with a specific problem place that might occur. So again, that rather than us identify where we think the places are based on the intelligence and the information that we've got in, we share that information and intelligence with partners, and we decide together where the places in York are. So that, as I say, that will then inform where and how I deploy the resources, in particular the neighbourhood resources. Do we co-locate? Do we have 1 or 2 bases within the police that we work out of? Do we co-locate in a school? So those are all things that once we identify a place that we can talk to as a partnership and say, right, this is where we need our resource. Now, the other part of place-based working is that we want the community safety hubs to be the driver around some of the activities that we do, some of that targeted activity. We want the community safety hubs to be a hub. And so that would develop on what James talked about today in terms of how we would envisage the community safety hubs. Within our place-based working project, we have some resource growth. So we're going to expand across the whole organisation by about 9 or 10 sergeants. We haven't quite decided that yet. We've got 8 community safety hubs, so potentially 1 or maybe 2 for York, extra police officers in the hub. But that extra resource is understanding what are we going to do with that resource? How are we going to utilise it? How best is it going to help drive our problem-solving actions and behaviours? So that's around the community safety hubs. So they are integral to our place-based working. And then I'll come to the third element, which is around co-production. So we're very keen, traditionally, and I look at colleagues from officers from the council and other agencies. Police, we're very task orientated. So you ask the police to turn up to something, we turn up and we try and get it sorted out by 5 o'clock this afternoon. because that's probably as far as our attention span would go. But we are very driven to taking control and driving things forward. There's a lot of strength and advantage to that. However, when you're looking at co-producing place-based working, the police, we need to learn to take a step back, be a bit more humble and listen to partners, and offer partners the bit of community safety that we are very good at, which is enforcement. So it's how do we use police enforcement to help to solve a problem? And I'll explain that in a moment. What we're trying to do with the co-production is not just linking in with partners, it's also linking in with communities, because ultimately we're trying to build that social capital. So this morning I was filmed making a plea to the residents of Foxwood to contact the police, because our perception is that the community in Foxwood are not 100% trusting of us for many reasons. And so that plea was, please give us the information. We will work on that information. And hopefully when we work on that information and we build trust and the community can see that the police and partners are actually doing something about problems and achieving success, the theory, and it's more than a theory, the evidence shows that communities then become engaged, and your long-term chronic antisocial behaviour and problems don't always go away, but they become more controlled. So the idea is around driving towards social capital. That is sort of a medium to a long-term aim. And of course, the other element is about engagement, engaging communities, because I'm sure the public will tell you as councillors, they certainly tell me as the commander that they want the police to be more visible. Now, that's not always possible because of resourcing. However, if we engage in intelligent ways, if we engage in the right places, and people see us engaging and we're solving problems, then for me, that is the visibility that the public are wanting. They see the police are proactive and effective. So let me take an example of a problem that is not just a problem for North Yorkshire Police, it's a problem for the City of York Council, and it's a problem for the residents who live next to the Little Knavesmire. So that has been an antisocial behaviour hotspot off and on for many years, and disregard the races. I'm not talking about races. So I met with residents last week to talk about the policing response they felt was not adequate during the summer last year. And so we talked it through. Now, I'm going to go back and sit down with my team. Now, what we need to do is we need to get stakeholders involved. So that will obviously include Jane's team, but there are other stakeholders. There's the race course, there's the residents, there might be youth groups. There are all types of stakeholders. Get them into a room, identify what the problem is. What is the problem on the Little Knavesmire? Is it kids coming and drinking on a night or whatever it might be? Then together, after we've identified the problem, we begin to work through how we're going to deal with that problem. So rather than the public calling the police every night when an issue arises, and us sometimes turning up on time and doing something, or other times unable to turn up because we've got priorities elsewhere, we agree as a partnership and a community how we're going to use police enforcement powers, and we commit to that. And then other agencies commit to how they are going to deal with, it might be take down the park benches or put up park benches. It might be having a dog walking club. It might be we cut the grass on an evening, every Wednesday at 7 o'clock in the evening because that keeps the use away. So whatever it is, that's the idea. But what I'm trying to do with my team is to get them to engage at the beginning with stakeholders. I think we've moved away as a team from that early engagement with stakeholders to help us plan things. So that's the whole idea. So it's also, in terms of place-based working, it's also a cultural change. So that's what we're trying to do within North Yorkshire. In terms of members of the public contacting us, I am actively trying to encourage people that I meet and talk to use our online address to report. On our website, we have a reporting mechanism rather than ring on 101. 101, we do our very best to meet our performance requirements on 101, but 101 is a problem for policing right across the UK. Members of the public still want to ring in rather than using the internet or the website, but I'm trying to encourage. So I would say to you, encourage residents. Obviously, if it's a crime in progress and there's harm happening now, 999. But I would encourage people to report crime and antisocial behaviour in particular through our websites rather than 101. We're trying to deal with the 101 issues, but it is very, very busy. And the other thing that I'm trying to encourage my teams is to link in with community members, which they do, and give their email addresses so they build up contacts themselves so people can contact them. So very much like I do, I have counsellors that contact me, that we have contacts at each level so people can contact us on an email and then we'll pick that up. I hope that sort of answers your question, Councillor. I don't know if there's any questions from anybody.
So what we'll do, thank you for that, Mark, and yes, it did, and it was really, really interesting to hear about the approach that you're looking to take and sort of move away from just, you know, being sort of response driven to that kind of proactive problem solving approach, which we can sure members will have some questions on. If I can bring Sarah in at this point, because I know you need to leave us at 6:30, Sarah, so I want to make sure we get good value. Obviously, young people tend to get the blame for lots of things that go wrong in communities, which is in many instances very unfair. It would be really interesting to get your perspective on as a team that works with the Community Safety Hub, your interactions with the hub, interventions that from your experience are successful in addressing antisocial behaviour and maybe opportunities that there may be going forward to sort of do further work as part of the sort of public health approach that Mark kind of helpfully set out.
Yeah, sure.
And over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I'm Sarah from Youth Justice Service. We previously were always referred to as the Yacht, which was the youth offending team, but we've moved away from this. When youth offending teams were first created, all their work was statutory based, but we've very much moved on to early intervention and preventative type interventions. So we're now known as a Youth Justice Service because we can address more things than we ever really used to do. When you look at our caseloads and our statistics, it's really interesting where we used to be all statutory orders, so that's young people that have gone through the courts. The last time that I looked at them, which was at the end of December, we had 70% cases were early intervention and prevention and only minimal statutory, which just shows that the work we've been doing over the past few years is having an impact on how, you know, just what we're seeing statistically, and we are keeping young people out of the system more so by doing this preventative work earlier. So I'm a massive advocate for preventative work. So within youth justice, we have a variety of interventions that we can facilitate. I think some of our problem is people don't necessarily always realise what we do and what we can't do. We do only work with those aged 10 to 18, so that's one of the key things to know. So we work very, very closely with North Yorkshire Police, and we run what's called a youth outcome panel. And this addresses all out of court disposals, which are disposals to work with young people and to ensure that they're not going into higher end orders and further into the system. Now, within York, we work with all out-of-court disposals, whereas other areas I know that they don't. So what this is ensuring is that each young person that's coming through is getting a guaranteed intervention, which means they're getting specific work to address why they're here. And that's where things like antisocial behaviour really do fit in, because it means something's happened. If the young person, if the police have looked for an out-of-court disposal, it means we're guaranteed to work with them. So that's a really successful scheme that we have running with North Yorkshire Police and North Yorkshire Youth Justice Service. Another thing that we specifically do within youth justice is we run a scheme that's called triage and diversion. So this is for those young people that haven't necessarily committed an offence, but they're coming to concern. So again, it links directly with antisocial behaviour. Now, the police can refer directly into this scheme, and York Youth Justice Service sit on the hub's meetings. So that's another way that the hub could also refer into this scheme to ensure young people are getting some work done with them. So just to give you a quick outline of what Youth Justice Service looks like. It's a multi-agency service that's comprised of health, probation, social workers, speech and language therapists, substance misuse, youth justice workers, police, but the really important one for this meeting is we also have a victim liaison officer. Now, our victim liaison officer has been doing a lot around antisocial behaviour just lately and working directly with the communities. She's done some work quite recently in the Foxwood area and also did some significant work with the police and the Community Safety Hub within Little Knowsmire area. So this was where residents were unhappy and youths were involved in behaviour around the area. So she went with the, excuse me a second.
Antisocial dog behaviour.
Yeah, sorry, that's my...
That's quite all right.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's my son coming in because I'm working from home.
No, really.
So yeah, so we have been doing some work with local communities with the victim liaison officer who looks at the issues that are being highlighted, tells people what's being done to address this and asks if there's anything else we can be doing at this time. And it's really valuable and we're getting some really good feedback on these types of things. Other things that we're looking at the moment, we do work very closely with the police and they're looking at some sporting activities for young people, because one of the things that we've massively noticed is to get people away from antisocial behaviour, you have to divert them into something. Children and young people that are on the streets or in public areas are the ones that are more likely to commit the antisocial behaviour because they're not doing anything. So we're quite big on looking at resources to use whereby young people, will be kept busy and will have an interest. With the police, we're also looking at a scheme that's called Empowering Youth, which looks quite interesting. I've got a meeting around this this week, and it links into what Mr. Khan was saying about problem solving, but this is empowering young people to do some problem solving around local areas and look at their views on how these sort of things could be addressed. So I'll be really interested to see how that goes forward and hope that this does come to York. It's being trialled in a few other areas and it seems to be quite successful. So we're fully supportive of that at the moment. Other things that we've got, we attend the hub meetings, but one thing I would say is sometimes I feel people come to us a little bit too late. It would be good if Youth Justice could get involved with some young people at an earlier stage, because people have to build evidence and gather things, and we fully understand that. Sometimes it feels like missed opportunity, which is why we're making sure that we have full attendance at the hub meetings to try and address this earlier. Our relationships with the hub are good, our relationships with the police are good, so we are improving this as we go along, but previously that's been an area whereby we maybe haven't been working with young people quickly enough. The more joined up working we can do from Youth Justice Service perspective, the better. Working with other agencies, you get such a better response to antisocial behaviour, and we're fully supportive for that. We want to increase the use of the victim liaison officer further because we can see the full benefits of that, and look at more restorative type interventions for young people whereby they can put back into the community.
43883 Please leave a message after the tone. When you finish recording, please...
That wasn't me.
Sorry, so I think somebody's phone dropped out. Sorry about that. Carry on.
Yeah, apologies. Richard Jackson here. I was just dialing in Mark again for his audio, but it went to the answer machine. I'll try again. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I'll carry on. So we're looking at more restorative type interventions with young people. Restorative justice is something that has proved successful over the years that we've been doing it, and getting young people to put something back into the community is always massively positive. So that's where we are at the moment. If anyone has any questions for me.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really insightful, and certainly I learnt a lot more to add to my rather scant knowledge of what the Youth Justice Service do. So I'll open it up to questions from members to Mark and Sarah in particular before she has to leave. So particularly focused on, I think, sort of paragraphs 4 and 5 of the report, which sort of focus on the real sort of meat of the operation of the community safety hub, just to aid our understanding, and also to maybe delve deeper into some aspects of how things work. So if anyone wants to raise their virtual hand, or physical hand, but virtual hands are better because it's easier for me to see. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a load of questions for both Sarah and Mark, as Sarah's leaving early. Can you just explain how you get involved at the sort of pre-court, pre-conviction stage? Where do those referrals come into you from? And if issues are identified in an area or with a certain group of young people, how would we as members, for example, plug you into making you aware that there's something going on?
Okay, so a lot of our referrals come from the police directly. We have a police officer, who works directly within the schools as liaison within the schools. So an awful lot of our referrals will come in directly from herself and PCSOs, who are absolutely fantastic in our local area. I would definitely just say that. Other referrals might come in because schools are raising concerns, or the ASB hub, because we attend the ASB meetings. So to refer directly into youth justice is not really a simplistic thing to do. It has to come in through police type services, through the courts. But there's never any harm in picking up the phone and talking to us, because we will always listen to what's being said and can raise things further.
And can I just ask you one other totally separate question to that? But you were talking about getting young people involved in activities and essentially diversionary schemes. Mm-hmm. How easy are you finding that in the current environment, when funding's been cut? There's not so many youth clubs, not so much availability of sporting activity. How in practice are you finding delivering those types of diversionary activities?
It's been difficult during COVID, without a doubt, because things didn't have availability and people couldn't be together. However, we've managed to keep Moor Lane open to work with young people, which is our base. We were very specific about, trying to ensure it's COVID secure and working from there. So we've managed to still carry on with quite a few things. Funding wise, there's often pots of money available if you really look for them, and it's like the Empowering Young People. That is actually a funded scheme that was brought to our attention by Inspector Lee Poynton. So it's like that, if things can be funded, then that's absolutely brilliant for young people.
Good.
Sarah, just a couple of questions from me, picking up the point from Councillor Pavlovic about how members, residents, anybody can feed in information, which of itself might seem perhaps a relatively insignificant, but when joined up with other information that others have supplied, either helps to identify people who who might be sort of in need of some of the sort of support that Sarah was talking about, or people who may be of interest to the police. My understanding of how it works is that that information needs to be fed into the police, and then depending on the nature of the issue and the almost the kind of complexity, then it would appear on the community safety hub radar. So what is the best sort of means for information and intelligence to be shared? I'm interested in from your perspective, Mark, because I know from talking to police colleagues, a lot of people share a lot of information on social media, and if they tag in the police, it's as though they've reported it, but I know the police then struggle to try and make sense of a sort of an avalanche of information shared on social media, some of which might be really interesting. And what I'm sure other councillors tend to do is screenshot things that I see on social media and then email that to the police. Say, you might, if you may be aware of this, if you're not aware of it, this is what somebody said on Facebook. But so I imagine you're dealing with a lot of information, some of which, maybe a lot of which, you can't verify or trace back to source. So given that, what advice would you give, Mark, in terms of how information can best be communicated?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. There's just so much information out there, and we're sort of living in an information overload time. So I think in terms of information coming into the police, it doesn't necessarily have to come into the police. So, for example, it can go into schools, the information going to schools, because the agencies will link in with each other. It can go to the local authority as well. But in terms of social media, yes, we do have the problem of people putting it on social media and thinking they've reported it. And interesting enough, the National Social Media Initiative in policing, we're looking to reduce the number of social media feeds that we have into the organisation. So we've had officers who've had their own Twitter feed or Facebook feed or whatever it might be, but we are beginning to take a lot of those offline as official North Yorkshire Police information portals, precisely because of that, because people might think they've reported something on social media. We are not monitoring it because we simply can't, and we miss something really, really serious. So for me, the encouragement would be, if you want to report something to the police, do it through our official website. There is a form on there that you can use to do it on, or ring us on 101. Obviously, if it's a crime in action and someone is going to be harmed, then it's 999. But those are the sort of three ways of ensuring that the information will reach us. So that's the only advice I can give. But we do get information through letters and emails and all sorts of ways anyway. But we try our best to manage this mountain of information that comes in. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's helpful, and often it's information that is not shared on a police platform, but shared on community platforms, of which there have been a proliferation. I can't stand that word. Since COVID, many with the best intentions in terms of sharing offers of support, but it can then information is shared about potential issues and offences, and I know a lot of councillors say to residents, it's no good posting it on Facebook. You have to communicate through these channels and make the police aware. So I think that's sound advice in terms of hammering home that message.
Okay, thank you.
Got Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair, for it's okay if I ask a question. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Sarah, but maybe it may be someone else as well who needs to answer. You were very clear, Sarah, that what you cover in terms of age range is 10 to 18, and I understand that's probably a very clear parameter. But I just wonder about, obviously, when someone's 18, particularly if they haven't had support before that much, they don't stop being vulnerable or in need of support. And you know, we do have quite a bit of instances of people who are over 18 but are still quite vulnerable, and whether they're the victim or the perpetrator can be quite fluid really in some circumstances. In terms of support at that, you know, it sounds like the sort of support that you're able to give up to 18 is the sort of support we would like to have, you know, for a slightly older age range as well, that continuity. I just wondered if you or anyone else could comment on that.
How youth justice services work goes back to historical youth offending teams. From 10 to 18, criminal age of responsibility is 10. 18 is the point that they would have transitioned to the probation service. So that's where our 10 to 18 age group stems from. So as it stands at the moment, we wouldn't work with anyone over 18 because it's not within our parameters. So that's as much as I can give you on that one.
Yes, I mean, I thought you'd say that. I just wondered if anyone else had any thoughts about how you can give that same sort of support. I mean, probation service, it usually follows when something has already happened, doesn't it? It's not the early intervention.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks
for that. Thank you. Councillor Vassey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I've found this fascinating. One of the things that really strikes me as we go through the cycle, because we've had a presentation broadly speaking on this before, is that cultural change is always difficult. And I'm getting the sense that all the partners have actually made use of the opportunity that COVID has presented to find different ways of engaging with each other. And my impression is that actually it's helping, changing the way people meet, changing the way they coordinate. And it would be nice to have your thoughts on how you think things will continue once we emerge from COVID, whether there's a threat that we might lose some of this progress because we go back to other ways of working that were more familiar before we dealt with the pandemic, or whether you think there are things that are going to be sustained and will help us positively going forwards. So yes, that was my first point, and just to get a sense of how you think we'll emerge from this.
Okay, Jane, do you want to
have
a go at that one?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, as you know, I came from much of this with the premise that we learned an awful lot from working in the pandemic. And, you know, having come from a situation where, for example, you know, most of the council services were all based in West offices. So having a conversation with someone was a wander down the floor plate. That's not been the case. And I think, you know, it's brought about some significant opportunities, as Councillor Vassey has said, to really change the culture that we work in, because the challenge of having that communication and maintaining that communication, which is absolutely crucial, having those discussions on a regular basis with partners is absolutely crucial. But what this has shown us is that we don't have to physically book a meeting room to have those conversations. We can have those conversations very, very quickly over a virtual meeting platform, and that is happening on a daily basis. I mean, I can see from my diary alone that the volume of meetings that I attend, multi-agency meetings, has significantly increased because it has become so much easier to do that. I certainly think, from the conversations that I have with all my colleagues across the services within the council that we work with, particularly with housing, particularly with Sarah's team in the Youth Justice Service, and with the social care teams, is there is a real strong will to build on all of this, because some of the challenging cases that we've managed to resolve when we haven't had a lot of the options that would normally be available to us taken away because of COVID and the constraints that we're working from, has made us really rethink the way that we work. So I think, as Mark has said and Sarah has echoed, early intervention and prevention has got to be the way to go. And I think we've made that much easier by the mechanisms that we've put in place to have those conversations at a much earlier stage in the process, and to be really strengthening that communication between partners and between services across the authority.
Thank you. And in terms of what Mark said to us about place-based working, are you comfortable, Mark, that place-based working won't be in conflict with that evolving process now, where people meet very, very quickly with remote conferencing, and that the two can sit side by side going forwards?
Yeah, I think the two can definitely sit side by side. Obviously, for me, there has to be a physical presence in a particular location. That will continue, and then throughout the pandemic, police officers and PCSOs have been on the ground rather than working from home. Whereas, going back to Jane's point, for me, as someone who's responsible for building strategies and directing teams, I can meet an awful lot of people by a team. So my diary is very, very full. I have end-to-end meetings, but if it was a physical meeting, I would meet far fewer people. So, for example, the other evening, I met 4 residents from Scarcroft Road and Albemarle Road in the comfort of my own home, and in their own home. And immediately straight after that, I was able to action stuff. So I found at my level, this is a far more efficient way of working. However, I think for those on the operational side, yes, physically they need to be there. However, there's also, they get the same benefits as me in terms of the efficiency, as Jane said, because they can meet people who don't have to physically turn up at a place. So I think it's just another tool, engagement tool, which we now have the technology because of COVID. We are trying to get all our PCSOs laptops like I have here, so that, again, that's a big part of them becoming remote. So we're learning, just as Jane has said, and I don't think it will go away.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Sorry.
Could I just ask one more question?
One more, yes.
Is that okay, Stephen?
That's fine, yes.
It's relating to something you said earlier about residents and the way in which residents communicate with all these processes. While the presentations were being made, one thing that struck me when we talk about noise disturbance is a process that I was involved with while working in the city centre, which wasn't about antisocial behaviour per se, but was about busking. And there was a process about busking where it was required that the person who had a problem with someone standing outside their door playing 3 songs for 6 hours had to demonstrate that they had themselves tried to resolve the matter with the busker. And I remember at the time that seemed to cause a lot of problems for shop staff This was in Petergate and Stonegate, because they felt very uncomfortable about confronting themselves, the person who was causing them grief as they saw it. I was just wondering whether that kind of issue presents itself also in antisocial behaviour order and complaints, and whether you all think that residents feel they have enough information and are comfortable enough about reporting stuff without feeling that they'll get dragged in. And on the other hand, obviously, you want to know people aren't making spurious complaints about their neighbours. So it's just to understand a bit how that works.
Would like to have a go at that one. Jane.
Okay, so specifically then in relation to the buskers issue, that sits in quite a different arena, but because the way that busking is managed is, yes, sometimes there is antisocial behaviour perceived to be linked to busking, but it is dealt with in a different manner. And to be quite honest, we've done quite a piece of work recently with Make It York to look at that. So Make It York pick up issues where there is complaints about buskers first, and then it transfers across to my team later if there is a requirement to gather evidence for any sort of enforcement purposes. I think the main thing to say in relation to, you know, to residents reporting things, you know, we always encourage residents to report things to the police. I mean, when you make that report, it's, you know, you're not highlighting or drawing attention to yourself, you're simply reporting something that you've experienced, and you will be given the option of whether or not you want people to attend. So if I use, you know, an example of noise as a good one, when we run the noise patrol services on a Friday and Saturday night from 9 p.m. till 3 a.m. in the morning, when somebody reports noise, we don't go in uniform. So normally my neighbourhood enforcement officers are uniformed staff. They don't go in uniform on noise patrol, and we don't go in marked vehicles. And we liaise with that person reporting constantly from the time that we leave the office to the time that we arrive outside their house to make sure they're comfortable with us attending, and that attendance is very, very discreet. So I think, you know, we're all very mindful of the concerns that residents have about reporting things and the fear that, you know, perhaps it will inflame situations or make things worse. But that's, you know, that's part and parcel of our role, is to provide that reassurance and encourage people to come forward and report things, because they can do so very, very safely, and they will be supported at every step of the way.
Thank you.
Jane, thanks for that. Councillor Pavlovic.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I've got a few questions, Mark, and a few observations as much as anything else. I've probably spent more time working with different police officers over the past 6 or 9 months than I have in many a long year. And I have to say that it's been incredibly positive. And I think one of the reasons why it's been incredibly positive is because we've had consistency of PCSO. I think there certainly has been issues in the past where PCSOs seem to get moved around very quickly, and then you lose touch with who they are. You don't therefore have the relationship with them, and you've got to redevelop a new one. So within the sort of town hall area, we've had one PCSO that's just emailed me today, actually, and it's been incredibly positive. So if that can be maintained, working with one PCSO, and the other sort of just on that related topic would be that if the PCSOs, when they are, and indeed the neighbourhood officers, when they are deployed to an area on a regular basis, is, you know, if they could sort of touch base with us to introduce themselves, because sometimes we have that that background knowledge of what's going on a street or in an area, or that's not necessarily identifying a crime or it's just this is the type of thing that we're picking up on. And the other thing I'd just like to say just on that topic is that, you know, counsellors can be of benefit. So, for example, it was a police request, ironically enough, from a PCSO that we needed more lighting in Hull Road Park. Well, next week, and the neighbourhood inspector is attending, and we're going to have the unveiling of a lighting project, and it's the first lighting project in a park that's solar powered, and that came from a public safety initiative. You know, it's a very dark park. There's a lot of antisocial behaviour going on in there. Is there anything that the council could do to make that a bit safer for the public? And so we got the lighting on, and that's a way, I think, of co-working with elected members that should be maintained and encouraged, I think, wherever possible. But one thing that I did notice from a significant incident that went on for a period of time was that there was a real problem with reporting incidents in and them not being cross-referenced as being all part of one cluster of ASB. So if there was 20 doors down, there was an issue, and then there was something going on in the street, and then there was something going on in a flat somewhere else. They were all being marked down as individual crimes and or incidents. They weren't always crimes; they were just incidents that got reported in. And as a consequence, it took a long time for it to be acknowledged that there was actually something quite serious potentially going on in that area. And I don't know how that gets addressed, but I just thought I would ask you if there is a way that could get addressed. And finally, the council's enforcement powers, as you know, are really quite limited. When there are incidents, and I'm thinking particularly around county lines, the use of property closure orders, which is a police power, I believe, doesn't seem to be massively well used. Would that be a way of breaking a cycle of ASB, particularly where it relates to drugs and the impact that county lines and drug dealing generally, and not everything's a county line. Just do need to recognise that not everything's a county line. But is that a power that the police could use a little bit more frequently? That's me done.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark.
Closes at the end, and I might need some assistance with Jane on the legislation, but I'll talk in general about county lines. I'll start off with consistency of PCSOs in particular areas. Couldn't agree more. I am a big fan of PCSOs. I think that we need to make sure that they get to work in their area and they get the support that they need to. My vision is that your PCSO is the old-fashioned beat manager, and they're in their area, and by and large they're dealing with stuff. So they might ask the local councillor, can you help us with lighting, and it gets done. More chronic issues, the PCSO then writes a problem-solving plan, with stakeholders, and then that comes back into the centre where I have all the rest of the resources and we support that PCSO. That's the way that I see place-based working. so that we support the individual PCSO in the area. We're very much in a responsive model at the moment, and that's for loads of reasons, and I could have a chat with you about those, but I don't have the time tonight. So I absolutely agree, and anything that we do, for me, is about making the PCSO identified within their own area, and we keep them consistently in that area. And one of the things that coming out of the government at the moment is that they want to go back to named beat officers. It has its strengths, having a named beat officer there. But sometimes I think with that, an individual in a particular area, the public get their email and they get inundated. But that I'm all for having that consistency. The next one, introducing themselves. Yes. I think that, again, my view is that the councillors are part of the democratic process. We don't just, I know we have the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner who holds the Chief Constable to account, but actually we should open ourselves up at a very local level to being held to account by local councillors, because they are elected by the local residents. It's a simple part of democracy, and I will pass that message on to my teams to make sure that they link in with local councillors. I think sometimes colleagues maybe get a little upset because the council is criticising something, or they feel that they're being criticised, and no, it isn't. They're just telling you what the public are telling you. You go and triangulate that, and you go back to the councillor. But anyway, I'll come back to that. Cross-referencing incidents, yes, it should happen. Doesn't always happen. It's a real frustration for us. And again, I think that's part of that cultural change that we have. So if a PCSO gets a job in an area, they will know what's going on. When they're off and the response cops comes down, we're not the best at connecting up. So I know, for example, when I spoke to the residents last week about antisocial behaviour on the Little Knavesmire, they would say that we'd call the police and they'd turn up in their van and they wouldn't get out of the van. It's turning my hair even more grey than it is now. But I understand. I'm not making an excuse for the response cop, but if you've been to a domestic, you've chased someone in a shoplifting, you've got a whole load of work left over, and you get a call because there's some kids making a noise, you maybe don't always appreciate what's gone on, and you're not cross-referring,
And that's what the response officers were saying. They were saying, oh, we didn't know that something had happened here last week, and we didn't know that.
They shouldn't have that excuse, but that's my responsibility as their boss to make sure that we find a way that they know what's going on. So that's an issue that we've got to get to deal with in place-based working. And it's been something that's been with us for some time. We've got it right in the past, and we've got to get it right again. Because actually it's those jobs where a response cop doesn't connect up and someone, God forbid, dies or gets killed. That always comes back, and it's a reputational issue for us as an organisation. So, and I'll come to county lines. With county lines, for me, yes, we can go for property closure orders, but sometimes we move the problem from one place to another, but sometimes that's right. In general terms around county lines, where I'm trying to push our teams is around disruption, doing a lot of disruption, trying to make York a hostile environment. And we're looking at how we can move our resources around to allow a proactive team to concentrate just on county lines, those people who have been cuckooed, and in particular young people who are being trafficked by these gangs. I'll hand over to Jane about property closure orders, if you can help me with that one.
I can indeed, yes. So closure orders are available not just to the police but also to the council, and they can be very useful, particularly because we can actually close a property for 48 hours pending a court court case that's imminent to get immediate effect. So they've replaced all the former powers for closing premises, of which there were sort of 4 or 5 different ones, and streamlined them all into one much easier to use piece of legislation. Now, we do use them, as you'll probably be aware, because you'll have seen in the press, occasionally when we have used closure orders. What I would say is that the decision to use a closure power will come as part of a much bigger process around dealing with the whole issue. So it may well be, particularly with county lines drug dealing, that we've already got offences that have been committed by the person, and that is already going through the court. And to be honest, the person's likely to be detained in custody, and therefore closing the premises isn't going to have an immediate effect. So we use it, but we use it proportionately and carefully alongside other tools and powers that we've got available to us as part of the package. We also have to be aware as well that when we do use closure powers and we do prohibit somebody from accessing that property, we can quite easily displace that problem elsewhere, because the person will crop up in another location across the city. So we have to be mindful of that. So we look at the whole situation and then decide on a proportionate basis which tools and powers are best used to resolve the problem, if that makes sense.
As we've seen, and yes, and I do accept that point, but as we saw tragically a few months ago, incidents that could have led to, let's put it that way, a more proactive disruption and dispersal of an incident. If nothing else, gives the residents of that area some much needed relief, because there's nothing worse than just feeling that day after day and week after week you're just having your life turned essentially upside down by 1, 2, 3, 4 individuals, and the incident that I think you're referring to in the case study, that was 3 properties, but those 3 properties impacted on 50 other properties, and really genuinely made people want to leave in really large numbers. And so sometimes when I say, a property closure order, yes, it would disperse it into another area, but sometimes for just that peace of mind and just that opportunity to have a few days without any disruption going on, might be worth using a little bit more judiciously and regularly. And that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, and if I may, I would agree with that. What I said at the beginning around place-based working and how the police work in partnership. It's right. It's making a decision as a partnership that we're going to use a power. But we're not just using the power in isolation. What we've got to get better at is, right, we'll use the power, we'll close that premises. This is what we're going to do with those individuals within that premise. This is how we're going to prevent them coming back. And I think we've got to get better at that type of planning. Once we enforce, what we're going to do afterwards, what's going to happen afterwards. So yeah, okay. Sorry, Joe.
Jane. Oh, I think Jane might have frozen. I suppose one thing I was going to add, which you might have a view on, Mark, is in terms of public health approach to policing, place-based working, all feeds into
the individual that's in that property as well.
She's back. You're back. We lost you there for a minute, Jane. Do you want to
yeah,
start again?
So I didn't hear anything that you said, Jane.
Oh, sorry. So I think, you know, we have to bear in mind when we use these powers, and premises closure being one of the most significant powers, that enforcement powers that we have available to us, we do also have to consider the needs of that individual that's in that property as well. And quite often, many of these cases that we are dealing with are people with significant mental health issues. So we do have to be very aware of what that's going to mean for that person as well. So I think, as Mark says, the process that we've got going forward, that we're looking at through the place-based working projects and changing the way in which we operate through the Community Safety Hub, will allow us to use all of these things to much better effect.
Thanks, Jane. I was sort of just picking up the point around place-based working and a public health approach to policing is they're intrinsically linked with many issues that sort of manifest themselves in a housing context. So how will colleagues who work on the front line in terms of housing management, how can they be sort of supported to be part of this approach? I know the report talks about the police working closely with housing officers, and to be honest, it's mentioned in the report that there's a team of 4 officers in your team, Jane, who deal with tenancy related ASB, because I wasn't aware that you had that team of officers. So how yeah, and for housing officers it can be quite an isolated and lonely job, but how can they be supported working with the police and others to help resolve those issues before it gets to the point of having to take some of the draconian measures that you mentioned?
So I think that's one of the things that we have recognised, and the responsibility that's placed on a housing management officer to deal with things can sometimes be quite significant and at times overwhelming, depending on the severity of the issues that are going on. One of the things that we're wanting to do, and it's part of this process of early intervention and prevention, is to ensure that we're bringing cases into the hub at a much earlier stage in the process. So we have a number of meetings both between my team and housing, but also we pick some of these issues up through those daily meetings with the police, and also through the fortnightly meetings that we have with the police intelligence unit, because these addresses will crop up across everybody's radar, and that's when we start to see that picture. So instead of waiting for things to reach that level where housing have escalated the approach as far as their remit lies, is to pull those cases across into the hub at a much earlier stage, because the expertise that the ASB officers have in my team in terms of case building, evidence gathering, the access they've got to the police, because we've got the officers working with us in the hub, and enables us to be able to pick things up and run with them. And to be quite honest, the earlier things come across, the easier it is. And again, this is something that we picked up during the pandemic, where we'd started to see issues arising in properties and brought them into the hub at a much earlier stage in the process. It just means that we're building that evidence basis, and that we are in a position to be able to use all the tools and powers that are available to us and to provide that support. And we're also, you know, again, I want my ASB officers to be there to provide that advice, support and guidance to HMOs as well. Because, as I say, they've got, you know, a wealth of experience of dealing with the most severe cases. So again, it's offering that opportunity for people to just have an informal conversation prior to something coming across to the hub.
Thank you. And I noted in the report that there's a service level agreement between housing and community safety. I'm guessing in terms of having clarity about what support housing management officers can expect, and what information you would need from them in terms of sort of progressing and escalating cases, which would be helpful to have sight of at some stage.
Okay.
I think sort of reflecting on what Mark set out in terms of what the police are trying to achieve, I suppose it may be something that Jane and Mark and others are discussing is how could or should the current model, the current community safety model, adapt to support that that changing approach, including the lessons learned from COVID. It'd be interesting to have your views on that, and then also how the community safety strategy should respond. I think it runs up to 2023, the current strategy. So it'd be interesting to get your views on so the how you will assess whether the current hub approach as currently configured is actually delivering the outcomes we all want it to deliver, and what's in store in terms of a review of the strategy.
Okay, so Mark has already shared with me the business model for place-based working. So we've already started to have that engagement between the two organisations, and meetings are taking place. We've got meetings. I've got a meeting this week and another meeting I think next week scheduled to be working with them on that. The approach that Mark is talking about very much supports the way that we want to work within the hub, and I think as well it will provide that additional support and stronger relationship and link as well between the police and housing in tackling things much earlier in the process and being able to deliver on that early intervention and prevention model that we're all keen to see put in place. So there is nothing in the model that North Yorkshire Police are proposing that goes against how we want to develop the hub, and the hub, as Mark says, will be very critical to that process because of that shared case management system and the fact that we've got that information and intelligence sharing going on a daily basis. In relation to the community safety strategy, I refresh the strategy on an annual basis. So by the time we get to that sort of 3-year point, so 2023, we shouldn't be too far away from where we should be. The reason why we do that is because having a 3-year strategy didn't used to work very well for community safety because the trends change and things emerge. So when county lines hit us, that created specific community safety issues for us, as did COVID when that hit us. So I'm in the process now of revising the strategy, and obviously the element on tackling antisocial behaviour, the priority that exists within the strategy, will reflect the move to this place-based working model and the reshaping of the community safety hub.
Thanks. Just so I'm clear, the refresh of the strategy, so the priorities remain the same. So is what you're refreshing the sort of delivery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so we refresh, the priorities remain, those are the priorities for the 3-year lifespan of that strategy, unless something really significant happens, and then we would be looking at adding something in. And then what we do is we review how we're approaching each of those priorities and then tweak that. So that's where the flexibility comes in. So for example, in the last couple of years, much of the tweaks around the strategy have been to reconfigure us to be able to cope with working in a pandemic situation and continuing to deliver services in that context.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's helpful. Mark, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about from your perspective, how you find the operation of the hub in terms of supporting your sort of ways of working going forward.
There are a couple of things within the place-based working project. I was the lead for it, and we went through a lot of pain when we started looking at the benefits. There was a benefits manager came in, and as I was very ambitious with this, they kept getting, every time I said, "Oh, we will do this," we were asked, "Well, how are you going to measure that outcome? How are you going to show that it's going to be delivered?" So I'm confident that everything within the place-based project is deliverable. It's maybe not as ambitious as I wanted it to be initially, but I think ultimately we've got to lay the foundations to move up. So the problem-solving training, working with the Community Safety Hub to agree outcomes with partners and ourselves and how we're going to achieve those. We already have that, but it's bringing in other partners to see the outcomes around particular places. So there's a lot of plans within there. In terms of the whole of North Yorkshire Police, in terms of our strategy, we have something called a control strategy, and that is the priorities that we identify as an organisation. And those changed in December. So prior to December, we had fraud on there, county lines, and gone out of my head what else we had on there. But now we have community safety, community harm has come on to the strategy. So that is looking at working with community safety hubs and things like that. That fraud, for example, has moved off our control strategy. That doesn't mean that we are not prioritising fraud or we won't look at fraud, but fraud has moved into business as usual. We've got some really good processes in around investigation of fraud. So community harm is now a force priority on the strategy. And all of that is about working with the community safety hubs and partners to become more effective, more efficient in the way that we work. As I said, we've got 8 community safety hubs across our area, North Yorkshire Police, and most of them work in similar ways, but there are unique differences with each of the hubs, but there are lessons that can be learned from different hubs. So, for example, in York, the way that Jane deals with the prevent, the counter-terrorism stuff is highlighted as national best practice. In Scarborough, the co-location that they have in their community safety hub includes health. So what I'm saying is that we can learn from each other over the next 2 or 3 years as we develop in place-based working, and that's how we hope to improve the effectiveness of the hubs.
Great. No, that's really interesting. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just a comment about Appendix C in the report. Just to better understand how these figures are presented, and to just maybe suggest that they could, I think possibly for councillors, be presented in a way that was more helpful. We have, for example, noise warning letters issued. Or on another page, we've got community protection notices issued. What I can't get from that is whether there's a change in the number of people who are getting into complications with the community hub, or whether it's a small number of people involved in more incidents. And I was just thinking statistically, it would be helpful just to be able to separate those two things, because if we've suddenly got a splurge of 15 people committing 200 offences in a summer, as presented here, I certainly as a councillor don't really have a handle on what that represents. So it's just to get an idea of whether that information could be presented differently so that we could have an idea of how many individuals are involved as well as the number of incidents.
Okay. I'm sure Jane can take that way and have a look at it. And one thing I was going to raise in the Appendix C table, we've got sort of 2021, and then we've got 21-22 predicted. And some of the figures I scratched my head and thought maybe there's a COVID element here. It'd be helpful if it's available to have 19-20, because then that would give us, you know, a kind of almost a baseline to be able to understand whether some of the very high numbers or the very low numbers are related to how we lived our lives, continue to live our lives during these times. That was just a minor comment from me on that table.
Okay. Yes, I can look at that, and I'll have a conversation with Ian Cunningham in the Business Intelligence Unit to look at how those figures are presented. I mean, just generally speaking, I think I said at the start of the report, you can clearly see, particularly in the police data that the police gave to me, you can clearly see the impact that COVID has had. So definite increases in antisocial behaviour as we've come out of lockdowns, and sort of reductions as we've gone into lockdown. And similarly, you can see the figures reflected in alcohol related ASB as well. So and I think certainly, you know, just looking at table Appendix C and the figures which relate specifically to the neighbourhood enforcement team, I know from the workload that the team is carrying, we have seen a significant increase in reports during COVID, and we suspect that a lot of that is probably because a lot of people are working from home, so a lot of people are around much more, and with that you tend to get a lower level of tolerance, simply because people see things that they otherwise wouldn't experience because they'd be at work.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Sounds as though we're giving you a right grilling. We've been at it for hours, but can I just just on the tables, Appendix B, environmental ASB went up from 262 in 2019 to 1,559. Now, I'm guessing there was a significant COVID relation to that, or a relationship to that. But could you explain what that relationship was?
Yes.
And then could I just ask a more sort of general question about the public health approach to this co-location and policing? Clearly, we have a number of alcohol-related issues around race weekends and race days. But how are we going to take a public health approach with issues around substance misuse, particularly around the city centre, and persistent street drinking amongst those that have got alcohol-related problems? How are we going to be able to divert them from being regularly criminalised when support, help and interventions required?
Okay, so I'll pick up on the figures first.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. These are figures that have come through from the police, and the large increase in environmental ASB is because that's where reports of COVID breaches were fed. So we know they show a disproportionately high number of incidents because they include all of those figures on COVID breaches, which, you know, obviously were quite significant for some period of time. In relation to the issue over substance misuse and the way that we tackle that and alcohol related issues in the city centre and elsewhere in other hotspots across the city, and the approach that Mark's talking about is absolutely right for it. So previously, you know, we have used the SARA model in Safer York Partnership to tackle things. We'd sort of moved away from that into other areas to reflect the way that our partners were working at the time. We're now embedding that back into the process because it's tried, it's tested, and we know that it works. The crucial thing there, as Mark referred to when he spoke, is that everybody who is potentially going to be working with that model understands it. And that's why, you know, we are working to make sure that everybody from frontline police officers to, you know, the people in my team and extending it out to other partners have got a full understanding of the problem solving approach that we're trying to embed. If we do that, then we stand a much greater chance of tackling some of these long-term issues that have been bubbling around for years that we've never truly got on top of. And we're already starting to do some work in one part of the city centre using that approach, that problem solving approach, and that much more enhanced evidence gathering and working with partners as a bit of a test to make sure that we, you know, it is going to translate well. But I think it can only be positive, to be honest.
Mark, do you want to add anything on that latter point?
Sorry, no, thank you. I'm just on my other phone.
No.
Yeah, but I know what Jane said, and I mean, it's about working in partnership. You know, so if we're talking about street drinkers or people who you know have chronic health issues and they're on the street, then we have to, for example, engage health and have an approach about how we can help these vulnerable individuals. So, and that's the whole idea of public health approaches. It's about linking into alcohol and drug strategies and things like that as a partnership.
And will we be, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Will we be looking at sort of not decriminalising, but using diversionary policies for low-level possession, for example?
Oh, right. You're really moving into
oh, sorry. No, well, it may not be a topic that you really want to discuss, but it is quite interesting because I think there is that perception that that there is antisocial behaviour that's attached to that.
Of course. I was talking privately, and I'll share this with you, with the Chief Inspector at York, Fee, and we were just talking about issues around the ArcLight and things like that, and we were sort of discussing the idea of a safe place for heroin addicts to go and inject, and I know that there's lots of examples of that sort of policy across the world, and I think they did it in Middlesbrough.
Middlesbrough's worked incredibly well. Scotland the same.
Absolutely. Now, Middlesbrough was, Cleveland Police was very much involved with that, with health partners, and a new police crime commissioner came into office, and I understand immediately reversed that decision. So what I'm saying from a policing perspective is, I think personally, if you were to ask me, yes, we should be looking at dealing with a lot of problems in terms of from a health approach. I absolutely, but I don't think politically, I think the police sit in supporting that. But I think that, again, that is something, when you look at the public health approaches and you look at place-based working and you look at partnership working, that's where co-production gives you the strength. So that if there's a political change somewhere along the line, the policy is strong enough to manage and survive. So that's where I'm coming from. But yes, I would be open to anything like that. But that's where that sort of high-level partnership working helps.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so there are just a couple of other things I wanted to say. Just that I really welcome the mention in the report about embedding within the problem-solving approach a more sort of proactive engagement with counsellors. Often, sometimes it feels we're the kind of out-of-hours service in terms of, people tell us things and then we have to figure out what do we do with this information to connect it with the individuals or the teams who can make best use of it. So, my experience is similar to Councillor Pavlovic in that the new PCSO covering my patch dropped me an email saying, here I am, give me a ring, drop me an email, let's have a chat. And that's been really helpful in terms of being able to find a way of escalating things and hopefully from that can build sort of information sharing. So I very much support what's set out in the report. Just briefly on communications, it's good to see the Safe York Partnership being proactive on Twitter and raising awareness of whether it's fly tipping or other things. I think there is a Facebook page, but it's a bit out of date, so I don't know whether it needs refreshing or just taking down. Probably the latter, because that Facebook page links to a web page which I think has been superseded by the newer web page. So there's a few things there that need sorting out, but yeah, having that sort of coordinated approach to comms, I think, would be is a good thing. Jane?
Yes, I'm conscious of all of that. So just to say, in relation to working with ward councillors, I mean, we've certainly found that that's been really beneficial. So in the work that Mark described and Sarah described around Little Knavesmire, for example, having ward councillors involved in that process and working with us was really valuable. And it also means, because I'll put my hands up and admit we're not always the best at feeding back to the community what we're doing, and there is a really good role there for ward councillors to be assisting us in doing that, because you're probably having much more and regular contact with residents than we are. And also sort of building on that process, one of the areas of discussion that I have when I have the daily meeting with the 2 neighbourhood policing team inspectors is, yes, we cover what's been reported to the police in the previous 24 hours, but it also gives me the opportunity to raise issues that have been brought to my attention from other communication mechanisms. So sometimes that can be because ward councillors have contacted me about something, and it's an opportunity to raise it with the police to see if that's something that they're hitting on their radar. So it is, really crucial that we have that good contact with ward councillors going forward. And then in relation to the website, the Safer York website, and the social media feeds. So it's been a bit of a strange one, because they were set up initially, under Safer York partnership many years ago, before we had the community safety hub, and in the days when it was sort of basically me that was managing it all. And as you can imagine, with the workload that I have, it sort of soon has become sort of very unmanageable to some extent. So one of the things that I'm working with the team is, now that we're having full team monthly meetings at which communications is a standing agenda item, because we appreciate the importance of feeding back to the community and allowing the community to have that opportunity to get in touch with us. So we will be revamping the Facebook page and bringing it up to date, and we've got a number of ideas to do that. I probably need to take it down temporarily while we put that approach in place. And again, the website, as I start to update the strategy and to refresh that, it will get updated as well. Twitter works very well, because of course my staff all have it on their phones, on their work phones, and so they're using it all the time that we're out in the community. Facebook, a little bit more difficult, because it tends to only be looked at when people are sat at their desk, but we are looking at all of those things and improving them, because we really want to open up those opportunities for residents and communities to be able to talk freely with us and to contact us easily.
Thank you for that. Just ask around to see if members have any further comments or questions for Jane or Mark. It doesn't look like it. Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you, Mark, for giving up your evenings to come and talk to us. It's been really really helpful and really informative, and it's really encouraging to see some of the plans and the approaches that you're looking to put in place going forward. And certainly, as other members have said, it certainly has felt a bit different of late, and that's a good thing, and we want to continue to work with you and help solve problems before they become big problems. But thank you very much, and
thank you. Yeah,
you're free to leave now. You can go and go and put your dinner on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a break, Chair, for 5 minutes?
We can. Yes, no problem at all. So it's just coming up to 7:20. So if we get back together just before 25 past, if colleagues can do the necessary to put us in a waiting room and do whatever we need to do. I'll be back just before 25 past. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We now move on to agenda item 4, which is the Finance and Performance Q2 Monitor. So this was presented to executive in November of last year, so it's already a little bit old. Patrick, would you like to introduce this, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good evening, everyone. The report presented to this committee covers Monitor 2 finance performance for this portfolio. It uses extracts of data that was considered by executive on the 18th of November 2021. We've also added a little bit extra in there because there's so little written about the housing finance within that report, so added a bit just for scrutiny. The financial elements of the report are split between Housing General Fund, which are budgets that are funded from council tax and business rates, but also Housing Revenue Account, which is expenditure and income funded from housing rents. Across General Fund, a budget of around £2 million, we're currently forecasting that the services will be able to be managed within the budget. Within the HRA, again, we're assuming that we're forecasting that the HRA will come in on budget. Paragraph 9 highlights there is forecast lost income that has occurred due to the time taken to get void properties into a lettable standard, but it is assumed that this can be managed from reduced interest charges that the HRA is enjoying this year. From paragraph 12 onwards, the report considers the performance information for the portfolio. Obviously, I'll be happy to answer questions. We've also got Tracy Carter and Michael Jones available from the service if you're looking for detailed questions around service performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'll throw it open to members. Councillor Pavlovic.
Patrick, to what extent are the reductions in rents due to COVID and furlough, etc., and is that now seeing its the debt level, the rent debt level, now starting to balance itself out, or is it still continuing?
If are we talking arrears here? So
yes, yeah, sorry,
yes. Council house arrears certainly worsened from sort of pre-pandemic last financial year. 31st of March last year, we got up to about £1.5 million of rent arrears. The last figures I've seen on arrears, it's kind of stabilised at that level. It's not improved particularly, but equally it's not got significantly worse. So I'm hopeful that work done through the sort of rent collection teams and the like will start to see that moving in the right direction going forward.
Thank you.
Perhaps if I can just come in there,
yeah.
There's a couple of changes to bear in mind, which is the reductions in the levels of universal credit, and the end of the furlough scheme had they've had a kind of quite a long tail off period, which kind of goes beyond the Q2 figures. We're about to go live with the new housing ICT system, and one of the tasks that we've got there is to have a more granular approach to the level of the classification of rent arrears and what stage they are at in recovery, actually embedded within the IT system, which that's currently not the case. So as part of the go live transition plan, which will happen next week, we'll be reviewing every single one of those rent arrear positions as to where they're at in the recovery process, and reviewing payment plans and giving that another fresh look. So hopefully we will get a bit more of a kind of purchase on those areas where we've got a persistent problem that maybe have arisen from some of those things I've talked about, or where we need to take a slightly different plan of action towards recovery.
Stephen, can I just ask a supplementary,
Yep.
given that I flagged this up to you earlier and we didn't think there'd be scope to, but as you brought the ICT up, Tracy, is there any chance that there might be some training sessions put on for members about how it's going to work? Because I think there may be issues that arise with its rollout. And if we don't understand how it works ourselves, it's going to be really hard to advise constituents.
Well, it's going live next week, so you won't get kind of pre-training.
No.
That's reserved for staff.
Could we get some training relatively quickly?
I'm sure once we have got the system in, stable and embedded, we can arrange some sessions for those interested members who want to understand how it works. Well, from a customer perspective, I don't expect you to become experts in all of the disciplines that are involved in it, but certainly
there was just a press release went out yesterday, Tracy, that said this is coming in, and that all council house tenants on the waiting list are going to have to go through a different process, and so there may well be some questions that come to us from that, particularly if it's not overly clear and transparent. So the sooner the better, basically.
Well, that aspect of the go live with the IT system is from April onwards. So what we're going live with next week will be the existing tenancies, customer portal, and that kind of housing management arrangements, and the building repairs and maintenance side of it. The actual housing allocation side, the waiting list side of it, comes in from the 1st of April. So yeah, I think I'll take that away as to what briefing notes we might be able to provide members with. But I think understanding what you get and what you don't get is quite an important part of what you're going to have to experience. So yes, absolutely take that point, that member training will be an essential part of it. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've spoken to the team about that, and they're creating videos, so training videos that will be shared with members that are interested, and then there'll be opportunities if members have still got queries after watching the videos to ask some further questions, but I don't have a date when they're going to be released, but I'll find out for you.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And it may be a good idea at some stage just to identify sort of an hour slot where you can invite members to a bit of a Q&A session, having watched the videos, if there's anything else they want to ask. I know some similar sessions have been run by other teams, and they've been quite helpful in getting members. You can get members all together at one time rather than having to respond to lots of individual questions. But that'd be helpful. So thank you, Councillor Pavlovic, for raising that. Councillor Heaton.
Thank you. Just a couple from me. I mean, looking at paragraph 12, where it's talking about service delivery and talking about customer satisfaction, timeliness and responsiveness, indicators remaining positive. Could someone who's able, please, just give us a bit of, quantify that a little bit? Because at the moment we're on a very broad base there in terms of what that could apply to and to what extent.
Michael, do you want to pick this up in terms of our approach to broader customer engagement and how we're going to try and get below the surface of the big questions that we ask in our customer surveys?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to find paragraph 12. So yeah, absolutely. I think the new senior management team within housing is absolutely committed to greater customer interaction, improvement of customer experience. I think it's there's processes that have been put in place that we currently work to, which are kind of process driven in terms of delivering a product, but not necessarily delivering a product with good customer communications embedded within it. So that's an absolute key priority moving forward in terms of our external contractors and how we're going to use them, as well as our internal teams. And then we have a new strategy and performance team set up within housing, and a big part of their task and their vision for the next 12 months is learning more about what our customers think, feeding that into how we work, so that we're much more kind of you say, we listen, and we can evidence that what people are telling us is what we've done and how we change it and be a bit more accountable in that respect. So we're at the moment looking to bring forward a kind of 12-month plan that will outline what our priorities are, actions around that, and then kind of what you should see as a customer flowing out of them. So we hope that that's a positive step in the right direction about increasing our relationship with our customers and how transparent and accountable we are to them as obviously the rent payers within our homes.
The context of Michael's comments there are around a regular annual customer satisfaction survey, which got severely disrupted by COVID, as did the reporting back to customers about what they told us. But what we want to do is kind of up the game, and as Michael says, make that more granular. It's not just a you told us and we did, but it's actually learning from the things that people are telling us to influence daily practice. So we want to kind of do a gear shift on that one. But it's been really difficult during COVID to maintain those close relationships with customers due to the remote working practices that we've had and the disruptions that we've had to face-to-face contact. So it's a work in progress.
Sure. So what I'm taking for that then is the various elements we've got here that this is based on. We'll see dramatic changes then from next year and the year after. Am I correct in that?
To a particular.
Sorry, I'm leaving that one to you, Michael, because you went off mute. But
I was reading paragraph 12 again. How did you phrase it? Dramatic and significant. I mean, I guess things take time. So lots of the way we work are built up based on many years of experience. We're in significant contracts with lots of organisations. So everything can't change quickly, but I think there's a clear change in direction. I think, as Tracy described it, a kind of gear change and a clear focus that everything that we do as a management team is now focused on the customer, how they experience the service from us. So I'm not going to promise you a significant change in the next 12 months, but certainly I can promise you a significant effort to transition towards something that we all think is a better service for our residents.
And that's in the context of us being in kind of COVID recovery at the moment, and we think we're coming back to you in April. To talk about feedback on our recovery plan. Service levels at the kind of that very granular level would absolutely definitely impacted by COVID. Our ability to get into people's houses, repair their houses, respond to their queries, deal with their tenancy arrangements have all been severely impacted by COVID. It took a while to play out. And I'd say it wasn't until probably kind of September, October last year where we started to see the cumulative impact of that 18-month period of difficulty. But we've got plans in place now to address some of those particular service level KPI, your key performance indicators not going in the direction you want them to. That's kind of slightly separate from what Michael's been talking about, which is actually having the voice of the tenant much more prominent in our decision making and much more engaged in our daily work. So it's a twofold thing.
Right. So even though those figures are, say, broadly positive, we're looking, for significant improvement there over while making these changes over the next 2 years. Then.
Well, given that we're looking in the rearview mirror on the stats here, because this is Q2, we're much further on now. We know from how our kind of weekly, monthly mapping of our performance is that the impacts continue to happen beyond this point. So we don't want you to kind of base this on it being level and fine and nothing, COVID didn't have an impact. It did. It had quite a serious impact, and we continue to struggle with those challenges, whether that's about having staff available to go in and do repairs, or being able to contract with companies to go in and do regular maintenance checks, because all of that pattern has continued to happen through Q3 and will probably roll on into Q4, because we've still got staff sickness levels in the last few weeks that have been higher than normal, and still a difficulty of supply chain access to be able to get in and deal with those things. I mean, you just spent two and a bit hours talking about antisocial behaviour. The amount of time that antisocial behaviour in Foxwood, as an example, has swallowed up a lot of time in trying to get to come to terms with how those issues are rolling out on the housing aspect of that particular problem in a particular area. And how behaviours have changed and patterns have changed. That's all going on every day and it's not stopped. So I'm not going to promise you, Councillor Heaton, much as I'd love to, that it's all going to be fantastically better, but it will be more informed by what's going on the ground, and we will continue to press forward with that response that deals with a absolutely once in a lifetime knock to the way in which we normally do business.
Yeah, I think it's evident for anyone that it's not over yet, is it? You can't expect it to turn around tomorrow. But yeah, I'll just hold my my other question as I've taken a bit of time there. I'll come back on that. Thanks.
No worries, thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's supposed to be unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you've got a delay, Councillor Wells.
Ah, right. My queries, I think that it's just a technical issue. On point 15, it says that there were 622 net additional homes completed. Is that what I would call new homes, or is it in addition to other new homes? Does that make sense?
I think that is the overall position for the city in terms of all of the housing developments that are going on in the city and the percentage of those that were completed in that Q2 period. That's not the council's delivery of housing, that's across the city.
Yeah, and it's net
Right.
because...
So it's not...
Sorry, I was just going to say it's net because sometimes in building new houses, old houses are knocked down, and therefore it's the cumulative sort of impact of net additional dwellings that are within the city.
And then on point 16, it's got about housing consents. Does that include any of the 633 houses that were built or created? Or is that on top of the 633?
It's almost certainly on top of the 633 because the consents, the buildings are have a lag based on when they go through the planning consent period. So that's going through planning from April 20 to March 21. So ultimately it'll depend on how quickly they deliver, but I would imagine that it takes a reasonable amount of time before a house is completed.
Okay.
My only other query was about homeless households. We've got the homeless households with dependent children. Do we measure homeless households without dependent children anywhere? Or if the children are older, are dependent children 16 or 18? And then what happens to them? Do they just fall off the measurement scale?
We're monitoring all homeless presentations, including those with children, and yes, it will be up to 18 if they've got dependent children. At that point, they will be classed as an adult. But this presentation, the data doesn't include the number of general presentations, but we do capture that and we are monitoring it. During COVID, we've had an increase in homeless presentations, partly as a result of the economic impacts of COVID, but partly due to household dissolution, relationship breakups, family breakups that did increase during COVID. At the moment, we are dealing with that impact in terms of being able to find temporary accommodation and then move people out of temporary accommodation into resettlement, whether that be through their provision of council housing or in the private sector. But we're not presenting that in this report, and that is a figure that we certainly could provide.
Okay.
Right. Would you?
Yeah.
Would you in future reports?
I think that'd be
Certainly.
helpful just from a completeness perspective, in terms of having an idea of the bigger picture. Did you have a supplementary question, Councillor Pavlovic?
I did just on those numbers, and I hadn't picked it up on it until Margaret mentioned it. Conversions to existing residential properties accounted for 25.6% of all completions.
So which para are you in now?
Oh, sorry. So still paragraph 15 about the net additional houses completed. And of these additional homes, 81% were on housing sites, and this might be more of a planning question, but I didn't think if just sticking on an extension counted as a new housing completion, or am I misreading that bullet point? So it's the top bullet point of page 11.
A lot of those are offices that have been converted into residential buildings, I think is what it's saying in that bullet point.
Because it says, and conversions to existing residential properties accounted for 20. So that's the bit I wasn't clear on, because I didn't think that would count under any sort of housing completion. I thought that was just an addition to an existing building.
I think that aims to mop up things like conversion of a house to flats.
Right.
So
Yes.
Subdivision, I think, is what gets mopped up in that figure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that explains it. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question and an observation. So my question relates to the discussion we had in October about voids and the efforts that was being put in to try and reduce void properties and whatever. And the paragraph 9 sort of gives us an idea that it's still an issue. I was just wondering, what progress has there been, given the focus that we discussed back in October to try and reduce voids and thereby increase rental income, and how successful is it? How are we going? How are we doing with it?
Before Michael comes in and talks about the work he's been doing to try and kind of reimagine the process and sort out the way in which we respond to voids, there are two things caught within voids. There's people handing in their notice, then us having to deal with the state of the house and undertake any residual maintenance issues. And then we've got a couple of instances where we have taken a strategic decision not to relet properties in order for us to undertake more substantial maintenance activities. So Glen Lodge as an example, and some houses in Bell Farm where we've been needing to replace the pod on the back of those houses, where basically the whole thing needs taking off and needs replacing. But you've got to be able to vacate all of them to be able to do it. So we've been holding a number of strategic voids where we've taken a maintenance decision that will get access to the property to be able to undertake a significant piece of maintenance work. That has exacerbated issues with getting access and turning around quickly other void properties. So we are on those two instances, we are now getting kind of project management resources in place to be able to take those bigger schemes forward and do it properly. And I'll hand on to Michael to talk about the process analysis changes and the pilot work that he's led to close down our general turnaround times on void properties.
So yeah, I can talk about that, and I can probably give you a little bit of an update in terms of the numbers and the trajectory. So yeah, pleased to say that the number of voids has come down since we met in October. It bounces around a little bit, so I won't give you an exact number today, because the last figures I saw were at the end of December, but they'd come down from a peak of about 170 down to 120. When I last looked at them. That was partly down to how the team was being organised internally, but also that we managed to bring on board a couple of external contractors who are experienced in dealing with voids, who have been able to turn some round for us. So yeah, positive trajectory in terms of numbers. In terms of the pilot work, so we've taken one area of the city. So housing is generally split west, central and east. So we've taken one part of the city and we've been running a voids pilot where we've been dealing with empty properties in a slightly different way. And that has primarily been using a little bit of additional resource within the team to better coordinate services. So we lined each trade up so that they were consecutive. So as one trade finished, the next day, the next trade came in, etc. And we've managed to, in that pilot, bring voids down to about 25 days for the homes that have taken through that process. So that the pilot is coming to an end soon. We're drawing some conclusions from it, and we're seeing whether we've got the capacity to roll it out across the city. So it'd be a new process, a more coordinated approach across the whole city, which I think has got could have a really significant impact on the number of empty properties and how long they're empty for. But it's not complete yet, so yeah, watch this space, but we should be able to report back to you maybe a little bit more in our April session about that and how we might take it forward.
And of course, that has a knock-on effect into rent arrears, because if you get it let earlier, then you're getting more money. So absolutely common sense approach to doing it, but a really well appreciated piece of work that Michael's led.
I think it'd be good to learn more about that back in April.
Thank you for that. That's good to hear. The other comment I'd make is an observation, really, because going back to that paragraph 15, it talks about, as we've heard from Patrick, that the development sites we're talking about office buildings being converted to residential buildings. And I just wanted to observe, to make the point that I was taken to Rydale House in Piccadilly in December by someone in a motorised wheelchair. And this person expressed a horror that a new refurbishing of an office block could take place in the here and now that didn't enable wheelchair users to access the building. And I thought it shook me, I have to say. It's because I think many of us who are able-bodied don't see these things as easily as others will. But I hope that that's one of the reasons why we're getting an access officer. And I hope that we can really make an impact on this, because the idea of having, dozens of more dwellings in the centre of town that basically have a curb on them so no one can get in if they're in a wheelchair was quite shocking. So it was just to observe that and hope that we make progress in the year ahead on that issue.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm not quite sure where we would pick that up. Maybe if we come to talk about the housing SPD, might be in there, I guess. But
I mean, that's a matter of detail I can't really comment on, but the access officer may be able to help in advising developments where we don't actually have planning powers to insist on that. If you've got PDR, then our powers to insist within the planning regime are limited. Michael, as a planner, you can say more than me on that one.
Yeah, so I can't quote the exact details to you, but I think that the government have changed it now so that permitted development from, for example, offices to residential now requires a larger apartment to be created. So previously there was very few restrictions other than building regs, but that kind of loophole has now been shut, which I know doesn't address what you're referring to fully, Councillor Vassey, but I guess a larger apartment is more likely to be easier for a wider range of people. So I don't have the full details, but I'm very happy to take that away and try and pick up what we might be able to do as an authority around that very issue.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Can I just clarify, Chair, just so I make sure I've understood this? going forwards, is this the kind of thing that, had we got an adopted local plan, we might be able to put in an SPD that would create more context so that we could be more forceful with these kinds of conversions? Or are we still in the situation you've just described with permitted development rights? If that makes sense, can we envisage that we might at some point be in a position where the local authority could be more demanding to get a result that was better for disabled people?
There's a whole host of detail. I'm not going to try to speculate upon there, but generally speaking, the local plan will give us some influence in planning decisions on things that reside in the national planning framework. But permitted development rights kind of bypasses that in giving rights to development which don't require full planning permission. So they may need to comply with building control legislation, but they don't need the planning authority to give them the go-ahead to be able to do the conversion. And that's where all of the difficulties come in with the quality of what gets built. Michael, have I paraphrased the MPPF incorrectly?
No, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm conscious we're sort of veering away from the content of the report we're discussing at 5 to 8. Councillor Pavlovic.
Yeah, there is a but there, but we could, and you know, as you may all be aware, I have been pushing for an Article 4 that the city could introduce, an Article 4 direction to ensure that conversions of office to residential goes through a planning process, and its permitted development rights are removed. So there are things we can do, Councillor Bassey, if there's a political will to put the resource into it.
I think if you want to consider that, then that is definitely a planning issue that needs to be considered in a different committee by different people.
And on that note,
people who know what they're talking about.
I shall invite Councillor Heaton to ask his pertinent question.
There we go. So yeah, comes in on broadband, which is point 21. Just these figures, how are they determined? Is it house by house? Is it street by street, area by area? How do we actually accrue these figures?
I think that's one which I'll have to pass on to our business intelligence colleagues who pull this data together, almost certainly with support from ICT. So I'll see if I can find that out for you, Councillor Heaton.
Cheers. The reason I ask is it's quite significant that there are some streets where there are pockets which don't have access. So it would be quite useful to know down to what level, because we could inadvertently be over-reporting almost in certain areas. So that would be useful. Thank you.
That's a good point. So thank you for that. Do any of the members have any other questions on the Q2 performance and finance monitor? No. Thank you very much, officers. Agenda item 6, work plan, which is on page 45 of the agenda pack. Our next public formal meeting is on the 19th of April, where, as has been alluded to, we've got an update on the in the minutes of the October meeting. It was badged as an update on the decent home standard, but I think that will also include the topics we discussed at that October meeting in terms of impact of COVID in Brexit, in terms of voids, and in terms of performance around repairs and response to customer requests. So we'll have an update report on that. We'll have the Q3 monitor by that point. We're due to have a Safe York Partnership biannual report. Given that we've just had a Safe York Partnership report, we can maybe have a think about, do we want that to be, we will receive a report, but do we want it to be targeted on a particular topic? So I'd ask members to have a think about that. If there's a particular aspect of the Safe York Partnerships operations that we would want to discuss in detail. We don't need to decide now, but if members can have a think. We have a forum meeting on the 15th of March. Of the things we potentially could discuss, I don't know whether Tracy or Michael, we had sort of one of our unassigned items is housing strategy. I'd be happy to be guided by you as to whether a discussion in March on housing strategy would be would fit in time-wise, or the other issues that we could usefully discuss in a what would in effect be a sort of closed meeting, the March meeting. Councillor Pavlovic, did you want to come in first?
There's a few things that we could look at that have come out of full council motions. We've got HMO numbers, we've got registration of landlord registration scheme. That consultation process will have finished by the time we come to March/April. We should be able to get some sense of where we're going in respect of landlord registration. And I don't know whether the HMO full council motion that was passed unanimously, if we could at least get an update as to how that's likely to get addressed by council, might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tracy and Michael, is there anything else that?
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of the housing strategy piece, I think it would be an appropriate point to have a conversation with you about our thinking to that point. When we talk about housing strategy, we're not talking about, which houses should be built where, that's the local plan. We'll be talking about our building our relationship with housing tenants. So it's more about how we do business as a landlord. So it's maybe strategy is the wrong word for it, but it would be really good to have an opportunity in the diary to discuss that with housing scrutiny. On the HMO issues, there's kind of three issues all bubbling along there. Isn't there? There's the consultation on the extension of HMO registration into smaller properties, which is due to come back to March executive. There's the Housing Ombudsman's findings on planning permission or registration, how those two things relate to each other. And then there's the full council motion on changes to policy around the density of HMOs in the city, which I think also then relates to our affordable housing policies, because the HMOs are not just about students, they're about the provision of places for people to live when they cannot afford to occupy a house, either rented or purchased on their own. And I would really appreciate the input of scrutiny into that debate to link together those two things, and off the back of work that Housing Scrutiny have done in the past on affordable housing and the complexity of some of the issues within that. I think that will be really valuable. I think we're probably headed towards March executive with some or all of those considerations. We're still figuring out the timing and how they relate to each other. But yes, I would very much welcome a scrutiny conversation about that. And I think that will probably be slightly in advance of executive decision making on that, which I think is later in March.
I was just going to ask, is our forum before exec or after exec?
I'll just look with you in a second.
Well, you've got the calendar, I haven't. Well,
yeah, just while Tracy's looking that up, the issue that was referred to as by area planning around sort of database updating and the Ombudsman report, I've picked that up and I'm gathering information to report back to Chair of CSMC as to what the position is and what further work, if any, will be needed on the back of that. But I'll make sure members are kept in the loop on that.
And Chair, whilst Tracy's still looking up that, we have got the scrutiny task review that we might want to touch base on about the about how the policies are working. I mean, I know it's a slow burn, that one, but but it might be worth just having some sort of discussion about it.
Yeah.
So if your next forum meeting is on the 15th of March, executive is on the 17th of March.
All right, just before then.
So, well, you could be discussing the papers that have gone to executive in their entirety.
Should we do that?
Seems, yeah, it's good. At least the materials will be there. So, and then, yeah, I think that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, your publication dates might be a couple of days out, but I'm sure we could accommodate that.
But I mean, the papers for our meeting on 15th of March is an informal meeting. There wouldn't be any published papers, so
okay, yeah,
that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, no, I've made a note of the other suggestion, Councillor Pavlovic, about the sort of emerging scrutiny review, on which I'd welcome any comments from members on the proposal that I circulated in your own time. That would be great. Okay, that's fine. I shall type that up and circulate it around just so we're clear what's coming up. Any other comments on the work plan? No. Urgent business. I have not been made aware of any urgent business. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers, for your attendance and participation tonight. I seem to be spectacularly failing to finish these meetings any reasonable time, but it's I hope it reflects the importance of the issues we're discussing rather than really poor chairmanship, but I'll leave you to decide that.
It was a really good debate, Chair.
Yeah.
On the with the antisocial behaviour, and it was an issue that I think the public expect us to consider diligently.
Great.
And the only outstanding business is my tea. So
there you go. Likewise.
Oh, sorry, okay. Tracy.
Right. Good night, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.